What happens when a city boy running away from heartbreak takes a job on a dusty ranch, only to discover the cowboy foreman isn't just his boss, but his greatest temptation? This isn't your usual BL webtoon or yaoi manhwa love story. This is sweat, grit, and desire under the open sky. Dramatic pause. Tonight, we're diving into a story of forbidden attraction, hidden scars, and a romance that burns hotter than the Texas sun. Minho never thought his life would lead him here, to endless fields stretching into the horizon, fences that seemed to have no end, and mornings that began before dawn. He'd grown up in the city, surrounded by neon lights and crowded subway cars. Life had been noisy, fast, always demanding. But after a brutal breakup left him hollow, he needed escape. Somewhere far, somewhere quiet. So when he saw the job posting for a ranch hand, no experience needed, just a willingness to work hard, he didn't think twice. Within weeks, his life was reduced to jeans, boots, and calloused hands. But nothing prepared him for the foreman. The first time Minho saw him, he thought Jae-hyun looked like a man carved straight out of the land itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sunburnt skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, he carried himself with a quiet gravity that demanded respect without needing to ask for it. There was no unnecessary movement, no wasted word, just presence, solid, unshakable. The other ranch hands fell silent when he passed. Even the younger ones, usually loud with jokes and boasting, straightened their backs when Jae-hyun walked by. He wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice, but everyone seemed to know instinctively not to test him. On Minho's first morning, sweat already dampening his shirt under the merciless sun, he fumbled with a coil of rope. His city-born fingers slipped against the coarse fibers, his palms burning with each attempt to loop it correctly. He cursed under his breath, trying again, aware of how awkward he must look among the seasoned ranchers. Then came the voice, low, steady, carrying just enough bite to sting. "You're soft." Minho froze, the rope half unraveled in his hands. He turned, and there was Jae-hyun, standing a few feet away, arms crossed. His gaze was unflinching, assessing, like he could see straight through him. But soft doesn't last out here. It wasn't cruel. Jae-hyun didn't deliver the words like an insult, just a fact, a truth of the land. Still, they cut Minho sharper than any taunt could. I'll get it," Minho muttered, fumbling again with the rope. His hands trembled slightly, whether from nerves or the blistering sun he couldn't tell. For a moment, he thought Jae-hyun might walk away. But instead the foreman stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Minho caught the scent of leather and smoke as Jae-hyun's hand brushed his, firm and sure, guiding his grip on the rope. "Like this," he said, his voice softer now, though still carrying that deep steadiness. His calloused fingers adjusted Minho's, wrapping the rope with practiced ease. "You're fighting it. Don't fight. Feel the weight. Work with it." Minho swallowed hard, trying to focus on the lesson, but the nearness was overwhelming. The warmth of Jae-hyun's body radiated in the narrow space between them, and Minho's heart thudded painfully against his ribs. He nodded quickly, mimicking the motion, desperate to prove himself. When the loop finally held, Jae-hyun stepped back, expression unreadable. "Better, do it again." And just like that he was gone, striding toward the corral, without a backward glance. Minho let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the rope slack in his trembling hands. The days on the ranch fell into rhythm. Mornings began before sunrise, the chill air heavy with dew, only to give way to blistering heat by midday. There were fences to mend, cattle to feed, and endless stretches of land to cover. Minho's muscles screamed each night, his city's soft skin rubbed raw by the work, but slowly, he adapted. And through it all, Jae-hyun was there, watching, teaching, pushing. Straighten your back. You'll throw it out if you keep lifting like that. Keep your eyes on the animal. Respect it, or it won't respect you. Again, do it again. His words were sharp, sometimes gruff, but never careless. Each correction carried weight, each command forcing Minho to dig deeper, to endure. And beneath the hardness, there was something else, something steady, almost protective. The other ranch hands noticed too. Foreman's got his eye on you. One of them teased one evening by the fire pit. Don't screw it up. Minho had laughed it off, but his chest tightened at the thought. He told himself it was fear. Fear of failing, fear of being seen as weak. But late at night, lying in his bunk, he couldn't shake the way Jae-hyun's hand had lingered just a second too long on his shoulder during a riding lesson, or the way his gaze seemed to catch and hold, stormy and unreadable, across the dust-filled air. One afternoon, Jae-hyun assigned him to help with the horses. Minho had ridden a handful of times in his life, always under supervision at tidy city stables. But here, the animals were restless, powerful, untamed in ways that unnerved him. Don't let it see your fear, Jae-hyun said, standing close beside him as a bay mare shifted impatiently in the stall. I'm not afraid, Minho insisted, though his grip on the reins was tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Jae-hyun's mouth curved slightly, something almost like a smirk. Liar. The word, simple and low, sent a strange jolt through Minho's chest. Before he could respond, Jae-hyun's hand closed over his, steadying his grip. The mare snorted, but under Jae-hyun's calm, firm guidance, the animal stilled. Breathe, Jae-hyun instructed. His voice was close, so close Minho felt it vibrate in his bones. She'll follow your lead, but only if you trust yourself. Minho exhaled shakily, forcing his body to relax, and slowly, miraculously, the horse responded, settling into stillness. There, Jae-hyun murmured, his hand still over Minho's. His eyes, storm grey and piercing, lingered on him for a beat too long before he finally pulled away. Minho's chest burned with something he couldn't name. Evenings were the hardest. After the day's work, when the land quieted and the sky stretched endless and painted with stars, the bunkhouse filled with laughter and snores, but Minho lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance. You're soft. He'd thought it was criticism. Maybe it was. But the more time he spent under Jae-hyun's gaze, the more he wondered if there was something else in it. A challenge, yes, but also recognition. And the more Minho wondered, the harder it became to breathe whenever Jae-hyun stood near, because the truth was undeniable now. Minho didn't just respect him, didn't just want to impress him, he wanted him, and that, out here under the wide open sky in a world where silence carried more weight than words, was the most dangerous truth of all. It wasn't cruelty, it was fact. Still, the words cut. And yet, there was something else, something unspoken in the way Jae-hyun's eyes lingered when Minho wiped sweat from his brow, in the way his hand steadied Minho's shoulder just a second longer than necessary when teaching him how to mount a horse. The ranch lived by rhythm. The day began with the call of roosters, dew still clinging to the tall grass. Cattle lowed in the distance, horses stomped their hooves impatiently, and the scent of hay and leather filled the air. By midday, the sun blazed mercilessly, pressing down on every back, baking the earth until heat shimmered in waves. Then came the long afternoons of fixing fences, pulling wire, hammering posts into stubborn ground. Evenings were quieter. The men gathered at the fire pit, laughter spilling into the vast sky while flames crackled and the stars stretched endless above them. But for Minho, routine did not mean peace, because beneath that rhythm tension coiled tighter with every passing day. He told himself it was respect, admiration, that's all. But at night, lying awake in the bunkhouse, he couldn't shake the memory of Jae-hyun's voice, low and rough, saying his name, Minho. Just that. But it echoed, over and over, until sleep was impossible. Jae-hyun wasn't a man who spoke freely. He saved words like water in a drought, measured, sparing, given only when necessary. But when he taught, his presence was absolute. Loosen your grip. You'll spook her, he murmured one afternoon, adjusting Minho's hands on the reins. His chest brushed Minho's back solid as stone, his breath warm against the shell of his ear. Minho swallowed, his heart stumbling. Like this? Better. Jae-hyun stepped back, and the sudden space felt colder than it should. It went on like this. Lessons in silence, guidance through touch. Long days where words were few but glances spoke louder. And Minho found himself watching, always watching. The way Jae-hyun's shirt clung to his back with sweat under the midday sun. The way his calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness when tending to an injured colt. The rare, fleeting curve of his mouth when one of the ranch hands cracked a joke sharp enough to slip past his defenses. Every detail carved itself deeper into Minho's restless heart. It happened on a stormy evening. The sky darkened faster than usual, clouds rolling heavy over the plains. Thunder cracked, sharp and sudden, sending the cattle restless. The ranch hands scrambled, herding them toward shelter before the downpour hit. Minho, caught in the chaos, fumbled with a gate latch that refused to budge. Rain began to pelt down, soaking him through within seconds. He cursed, tugging harder, when suddenly a hand slammed down beside his own. "Move," Jae-hyun ordered. His voice was rougher than the thunder. Together they forced the latch free, driving the cattle inside just as lightning split the sky. The gate slammed shut, and Minho staggered back, breathless, drenched. Jae-hyun stood close, water streaming down his face, his shirt plastered to his chest. He looked like a figure out of myth, untamed, unshakable, forged by the storm itself. "You'll catch your death out here," Jae-hyun said, his hand gripping Minho's arm, his eyes burned storm gray and unrelenting. "I can handle it," Minho shot back, though his voice trembled. For a moment, neither moved. Rain pounded around them, but all Minho felt was the heat of that grip, the intensity of that gaze. Then Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. He released him abruptly, stepping back. "Get inside." And just like that, the moment fractured, but Minho couldn't shake it, because in that flash of lightning, in that closeness, he had seen something raw flicker across Jae-hyun's face, something fierce, something fragile. The storm raged all night, battering the bunkhouse with wind and rain. Sleep was impossible, so Minho sat by the window staring at the blurred horizon. When the door creaked, he turned, and there was Jae-hyun, leaning against the frame. His shirt was changed, but his hair still damp, shadows dark under his eyes. "You're awake," Minho said softly. "So are you." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, unexpectedly, Jae-hyun spoke. "My father used to say storms strip things bare, land men. Doesn't matter how strong you think you are, the storm shows the truth." Minho's breath caught. Jae-hyun rarely offered pieces of himself, and when he did, they carried weight. "Is that why you—" Minho hesitated. "Why you're so hard on everyone?" Jae-hyun's gaze shifted, storm-grey eyes unreadable. "Hard keeps them alive." A pause. "Keeps me alive." Something in his tone ached. a quiet wound, hidden beneath years of control. Without thinking, Minho said, "You don't always have to carry it alone." The words hung between them, bold, reckless, true. For a heartbeat, Jae-hyun looked at him, really looked at him, and Minho swore the world tilted. Then Jae-hyun turned away. "Get some rest, Minho." But Minho knew. He knew. There were cracks in the armor. Days turned into weeks, but the storm between them never settled. Every touch lingered. Every glance burned. Every word left unsaid piled higher until it threatened to break them both. It finally did. The late afternoon sun hung heavy in the western sky, drenching the ranch in a golden glow that looked beautiful from a distance but felt merciless up close. The air shimmered with heat rising off the dirt, the grass brittle underfoot, the smell of sweat, leather, and dust thick around Minho as he worked alone along the fence line. He had volunteered for the task, half because he wanted to prove he could handle it without anyone's help, half because working on his own meant he didn't have to fight the constant distraction of Jae-hyun's presence. But of course, even alone, Jae-hyun haunted him. The image of him was burned into Minho's mind, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his shirt clung to broad shoulders, the intensity of eyes that seemed to see too much. He could still feel the ghost of Jae-hyun's hand from that morning, steadying his grip on the reins with a touch that lingered too long, too deliberate to be nothing, too restrained to be something. Minho shook his head, forcing his focus back to the task. He pulled the wire taut, the coarse metal biting into his palms. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging, but he refused to stop. If he could just get this right, if he could prove himself, maybe Jae-hyun would finally look at him as more than the soft newcomer fumbling his way through ranch life. The wire slipped. Pain seared his hand, sudden and sharp like fire tearing across his skin. Minho hissed, stumbling back from the fence post, the world narrowing to the jagged sting in his palm. He lifted his hand, and there it was, a gash, deep and ugly, blood welling bright against dirt-streaked skin. The sight made his stomach twist, but he pressed his other hand over it anyway, clamping down hard, trying to will the bleeding to stop. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, frustration biting sharper than the pain. His knees wavered, weakness threatening to take him down, but he shook his head furiously. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't. The fence still sagged, the wire still hung, loose, and the cattle weren't going to wait for him to nurse a wound. This place had no patience for softness, and he'd already been told too many times that softness didn't last out here. So he grit his teeth, set his jaw, and tried to grab the wire again with trembling fingers, but before he could move, a shadow fell across him, blotting out the late afternoon sun. The air seemed to shift, denser, heavier, charged in a way that had nothing to do with his wound. "You're hurt." The voice was low, rough as gravel, but it carried a sharp edge that froze Minho where he stood. His heart stuttered. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. He would have known that voice anywhere. Jae-hyun. The foreman crouched beside him, movements fluid but controlled, as if even urgency bowed to his discipline. His hand reached for Minho's wrist before Minho could protest, prying his palm open with steady, unyielding fingers. The contact was firm, almost too much, and yet Minho didn't pull away. Couldn't. Jae-hyun's eyes flicked over the wound, storm cloud grey darkening, jaw tightening as though he felt the sting himself. "It's deep." His thumb brushed the edge of Minho's skin, careful despite the steel in his grip. "You'll need it cleaned, maybe stitched." "It's nothing." Minho tried forcing his voice into steadiness, but it cracked anyway. His chest was too tight, the air too thin. "Nothing?" Jae-hyun's gaze snapped to his, and the word came out like a growl, low and dangerous. You think bleeding out in the dirt is nothing? The silence that followed pressed down on Minho's chest heavy as a weight. His pulse thundered in his ears, and yet, beneath the anger in Jae-hyun's tone, there was something else, something he couldn't name, but felt in the way those rough hands steadied his, in the way those storm-colored eyes refused to look away, something that scared him more than the pain. Minho yanked his hand back, breath ragged. Why do you care so much? The words burst out before he could stop them, too raw, too desperate. He regretted them instantly, but it was too late. His chest heaved as if the question had been waiting all along, clawing its way free. Why do you look at me like that? His voice cracked, breaking apart under the weight of all he'd held in. Why do you act like you don't feel anything when I can't stop? He faltered, the confession catching like thorns in his throat. His whole body trembled, pain and fear and longing mixing until he could barely breathe. Finally, the words tore loose, soft and broken. I can't stop thinking about you. The world stilled. The kettle shifted in the distance. The wind rustled through the dry grass, but around them, silence thickened, unbearably intimate. Minho's hand still throbbed, but all he could feel was the heat of Jae-hyun's gaze, the pull of something that had been building between them since the moment they met. The voice, low, rough, unmistakable, shot straight through him. Minho's head snapped up, and there he was, Jae-hyun. He hadn't heard him approach, but now the man was right there, towering over him like the storm clouds that sometimes rolled sudden and dark across the plains. His brows were drawn tight, his gaze fixed on the blood seeping between Minho's fingers. Jae-hyun grabbed his wrist before Minho could protest, prying his hand open with a gentleness that belied the sharpness of his words. You think you can keep working like this? You'll tear it deeper. It's nothing. Nothing. Jae-hyun's tone cut like a whip, low but laced with anger. You think bleeding out in the dirt is nothing. His grip tightened, not cruel but unyielding, like the hand of someone who had spent his life holding reins, rope, and responsibility until it was second nature. Heat flushed Minho's cheeks, shame and frustration mixing in his chest. He yanked his hand back, the sudden loss of contact leaving him cold despite the sweat. Why do you care so much? The words ripped out of him raw and unplanned. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, his throat tight. He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to break the fragile balance between them, but it was too late. The question hung heavy in the air. Jae-hyun's jaw clenched. His silence was louder than a shout, his storm-colored eyes unreadable. Minho's voice shook as the dam inside him cracked. Why do you look at me like that? Jae-hyun flinched, almost imperceptibly. Why do you act like you don't feel anything? Minho pushed on, desperate, reckless. When I can't stop. His voice broke, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. I can't stop thinking about you. The words landed like thunder. The ranch stretched quiet around them, cicadas buzzing in the grass, the distant lowing of cattle, the sun sinking slow and heavy. But between them, everything was sharp, breathless, alive. Jae-hyun's stare burned into him, and Minho's knees nearly gave under the weight of it. For the first time, the silence wasn't just silence. It was a precipice. Silence. The world narrowed to the space between them. Jae-hyun's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. For a long, unbearable moment, Minho thought he had ruined everything. Then Jae-hyun stepped forward. Damn it, Minho, he rasped. And before Minho could breathe, Jae-hyun's mouth crashed against his. The kiss was fierce, desperate, years of restraint burning away in an instant. Minho gasped, clutching at him, the taste of rain and earth and want flooding his senses. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Jae-hyun's forehead rested against his. I tried, Jae-hyun whispered, voice raw. Tried to stay away, but I can't. Minho's eyes stung. He smiled. Through it. Then don't. The ranch did not change. It rarely ever did. The morning still came early, harsh and demanding, as if the land itself refused to wait for anyone. Dawn broke in shades of copper and gold, spilling across the horizon and waking the cattle with low guttural calls. The air was sharp at first, cold enough that breath misted in front of their lips, before softening into the dry warmth of another endless day. The chores never shifted. The cattle still needed feeding, the fences still needed mending, the horses still needed tending. Life on the ranch was not built for surprises. It was a rhythm, a cycle, a loop that never faltered. But Minho changed, and Jae-hyun changed too. It wasn't the kind of change that came with fanfare or sudden revelation. It was quieter, more dangerous for the very fact that it snuck in unnoticed. At first, it was only a glance, too long, too heavy, lingering like a hand pressed to skin, long after it had been withdrawn. Then it became the brush of a shoulder when passing each other in the barn, the warmth of a palm steadying Minho's back as he climbed down from a horse, the unspoken tether of presence that seemed to pull them closer each day. Where once there had been silence, there was now a quiet understanding. It lived in the space between words, in the pauses where Minho's heart stuttered and Jae-hyun's breath caught. The world around them continued its unchanging march, dust storms, cattle calls, the creak of leather and wood, but within that vast sameness. The air between them was alive, charged with something neither dared name. Where once there had been distance, there were now lingering touches, stolen moments beneath the wide, star-strewn sky. The stars above the ranch stretched endlessly, spilling silver across the plains, as though the universe itself bore witness to their secret. Some nights, after long hours of labor, they would find themselves alone by the fire pit. Jae-hyun would sit in his usual stillness, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the flames, while Minho fidgeted beside him, restless with words he wanted to say but couldn't. Then, just as silence threatened to suffocate him, Jae-hyun's hand would shift, his rough fingers brushing against Minho's. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to set Minho's chest burning. They did not shout their love to the world. They did not need to. Theirs was not a love of spectacle or grand declarations. It was forged in subtler ways, in the raw, unvarnished reality of daily life, in the way Jae-hyun filled Minho's water canteen before a long ride, in the way Minho stayed awake when Jae-hyun worked late, waiting with a blanket and a quiet word, in the shared silences that no longer felt empty, but safe. Because in the way Jae-hyun's hand found Minho's in the dark, in the way his storm-grey gaze softened when no one else was watching, the truth was clear. Words were not necessary. In fact, they would have ruined it, broken the fragile spell that wove itself into their lives. Beneath the endless ranch sky, in a world carved by routine and silence, they had found each other. That alone was extraordinary. For Minho, who had once felt like an outsider, the ranch had been nothing but dust and labor, a place that wore his body down and left him feeling invisible. But now, every morning carried possibility. Every evening shimmered with the promise of Jae-hyun's presence. For Jae-hyun, who had lived his entire life in discipline and distance, the days had always blurred into one another, until Minho arrived, stumbling, too soft, too human, and somehow turning the monotony into something he secretly craved. Love, they realized, did not need to be loud. It could be built from glances across a corral, from laughter shared while chasing stray calves, from shoulders brushing as they walked back to the bunkhouse. It could bloom quietly, stubbornly, in the cracks of a life where it had no place, like wildflowers growing in the dust. And yet, despite the peace they found in each other, there was always the shadow of risk. A ranch was a hard place, filled with men who worked until their bones ached, who didn't speak of tenderness, who valued silence over sentiment. Theirs was not a love that would be easily accepted, and both of them knew it. But beneath that sprawling sky, where the stars bore witness and the earth seemed endless, fear mattered less. The love they carried was their own kind of rebellion, a soft defiance in a world built on hardness. And for Minho, that was enough, more than enough.